everybody, and welcome back to another video. Today I am joined by my very, very good friend Rebecca, and I have recently converted her to the Howlers and the Sons of Ares, and we are going to be talking about the entirety of the Red Rising trilogy by Pierce Brown. So for those of you who have not read the entirety of the trilogy, that is Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star, we are very likely going to have spoilers, so this is your obligatory spoiler warning. Please skedaddle off, read the books, and then come on back and join the party. Woo! Alright, boyo, let's get this over with. So, I guess I'll start to say when we read these. I'll say for my part that I read Red Rising back in 2014. It was released in January of that year. I do believe I read it in like August of that year. I had bought it on a deal on Kindle. It was like $1.99 on Kindle, and you could get the audiobook for another $1.99. So I bought both of them at the same time and just didn't get to them until August. I was still working at Barnes & Noble, so I'd seen this around in sci-fi fantasy, and like its cover is so kind of like you just notice it because of the bright red, and I just had never gotten around to reading it because I'm a horrible human and I should have gotten around to it. And then, this will probably piss people off, I read Golden Sun in December of 2014. It came out in January of 2015, but I got a digital arc of it, and so I sat there knowing the ending of Golden Sun, not being able to talk about it to anybody. And then I knew I had to wait even longer for Morning Star. And then obviously both of us just read Morning Star. I read it the day it released, so just this past Tuesday. And so how about you, Rebecca? What was your path to Red Rising?
Well, I read Red Rising less than a week ago. I started it, I guess it was a full week ago. I think I started it on Thursday of last week.
That sounds about right.
And then on like Sunday finished it, and I asked Mad when Morning Star was supposed to come out, because I was like, I'm gonna plan on finishing Golden Sun in time for that. I was listening to the audiobooks. I have the physical books. I didn't bring my props. I'm sorry.
Must bring props.
Partly because my husband has a Golden Suns right now, so that would be awkward.
That would be I'd be like, honey, I need to take that now.
I'm gonna steal it from you. So I was listening to the audiobooks, and they're like 20-ish hours each, and so I was like, yeah, I could take my time with Golden Sun, I guess, even though, Red Rising was quite engrossing. Madeline told me, oh yeah, Morning Star comes out on Tuesday, no chill, I'm so excited, like I could die right now. And I was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm gonna accelerate this process. So I listened to all 20 hours of Golden Sun somehow in like a day and a half, because I started Morning Star on Tuesday night. And I finished Golden Sun, and for those of you that have read them, you will know that the ending of Golden Sun is like...
It is Detective Mills at the end of 7 screaming, "What's in the fucking box?" That is the ending of Golden Sun.
It was so I listened to like the first half hour of Morning Star on Tuesday night before I went to bed, because I was like, I can't even right now, which was not very helpful, because those of you who have read them know at the beginning of Morning Star. So it got to a point on Tuesday night where I was like, I'm just gonna go to bed now.
I remember because you were talking to me and I'm like, I can't help you. There is no emotional way for me to give you a safety net, because it's just trauma. It is trauma for however many hundreds of pages that is.
Madeline had finished on Tuesday and was giving me her spoiler-free reactions, which basically just consisted of her oh my god, I can't handle it. I can't tell you what's going on, but I can't handle it.
And then there was the point where I was just like, goodbye, cruel world. I can't do it anymore. I quit. And you know exactly what point I was at. Now that you've read it, you know the point where I was like, goodbye, cruel world. I hate everything. I can't.
Yeah. So basically, of course, then I went in just terrified of this book. I got to most of it on Wednesday and then finished it on Thursday, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but just in terms of getting into it, I love a lot of books, and if people make me read books, I will usually like books that are outside my normal range of books. But when I say give me a recommendation for a book, I'm usually talking about probably a YA fantasy, maybe an adult fantasy with like a female protagonist and there's like a prominent love story, and you know, that's who I am. And of course, Mad, I asked her like 800 times because my Christmas present from my husband was a book shopping spree, which he was not prepared for. I don't think he understood what he was doing.
He had no idea what he was getting into.
When he offered that, that was my wedding present. Sorry, that was not Christmas. It was a combined Christmas wedding thing, so I guess it was slightly justified that I made him spend several $100s on me, but it was fine. Anyway, before this happened, I was like, Matt, I need lots of recommendations of books, because I really only have like a couple that I'm interested in buying, so tell me what to buy. And she had, for the longest time, every time I said, can you give me a recommendation, she would be like, Red Rising by Pierce Brown. And she's like, but also these ones. And I kept looking at the description for Red Rising, and I was like, color-coded society, main characters, the bad color, revolting against the powerful color. I've read this book thousands and thousands of times. This is what everybody writes nowadays. It's your basic YA revolution story with a random dystopian future. And so I was like, I don't know, but she kept saying it, so I was like, you know what, fine. This has really good reviews, and I will buy the book. So I bought the physical book, but then it wasn't until I got the audiobook, and I had listened to, 18 other books like the past month. And when I was like, okay, I'll listen to Red Rising. Like, I cannot stress enough how much I was dragging my feet into this experience.
God, I know, because I knew you were, and also because the main character was a guy, so I really had to be like, no, just please trust me on this, because I knew it was...
The other thing is, when I started, I was choosing between Red Rising and this other book called Night Circus, and I kept saying, so I think I might listen to Red Rising today, but I really want something with, like, a good love story. So, is Red Rising, like, a romance? And Matt's like, no, but you should read it anyway. And I was like, you know what, fine, I queued it up, I'll listen to it. Like, it was a feet-dragging experience. I mean, like...
I remember... Well, at one point I was just like, look, if you want a love story, yeah, just go read The Night Circus. I'm like, but please say you'll read Red Rising right after.
Please just read Red Rising. Please just read it. And yeah, so it was funny because then I started listening to it, and first of all, the narrator, who Mad knows his name, I'm so bad at remembering names.
So the narrator for the Red Rising books is Tim Gerard Reynolds, and he is fantastic.
I cannot sing his praises enough, especially since I got Audible a couple months ago, and I have been kind of compulsively listening to books. And for the most part, the narrators have been good. There was one really, really terrible narrator.
#bye, Jenny.
Bye, Jenny. I won't get into that. But there have been some really good ones, too, where I was like, wow, this narrator's really good. This guy is, like, a whole other level of good. Like, whole other level of good. So, like, the basic narration, that he says everything correctly, he gets the pacing right, like, he gets the feelings right, and you're in it, and in moments of intensity, he literally speeds up his talking, and there's just, it's amazing, and then he also kills it with the accents.
Yeah.
So the characters from basically different colors originally, and then, like, different parts of the world, and even parts of the solar system, so at one point they're, like, on the rim, and so he gives the characters who normally have British accents a much more sophisticated, it almost is like South African.
Yeah.
Whatever that accent is, so it's like related to British, but you can tell it's different. And just the amount of detail that went into his narration, and the way he slays it, and his voices are consistent for all the characters, and it made it was so alive and so real, so I got into it, like, right away, because not only does the narration pick up right away, like, the main character almost dies in, like, the first chapter.
Yeah, it's like the first...
That's his fault. That's his fault. He just goes cavalier.
Yeah, it's like the first 30-ish pages. I remember when... My dad has also read the series. He has not yet read Morningstar as of right now, but I told him it was in my Audible so he could steal it. But I had to kind of convince him to read this. I've gotten better at figuring out what my dad does or doesn't like, and I usually have a hard time convincing him to read science fiction or fantasy, so I tend to be very particular about what I recommend to him, and I said, Dad, you will really like Red Rising. My elevator pitch to him on Red Rising was that it was the Count of Monte Cristo meets Game of Thrones on a future Mars where the rigid hierarchical society is like if ancient Rome embraced eugenics, which all he heard was Count of Monte Cristo, and he was in. And that's really the part that he loved about Red Rising was he said ultimately it was like a spy story, and I was like, actually, yeah, it kind of is. I hadn't thought of it that way. But, and I told him, I said, give it the first chapter or so. I said, it takes a little while to pick up. I said, but within the first, what I had guesstimated was about 30 pages, I said, the plot then hits the ground and goes. I said, it takes a little bit to set up. But the one thing he loved, because he loves audiobooks, he listens to them all the time when he works, he loved the narrator. Tim Gerard Reynolds, as he said, he goes, I love the accents for the different colors. He goes, it really helped immerse you in this world. And I went, yeah, because that's a prime narrator, is what they do with the character voices and getting you into the world. And since my dad listens to even more audiobooks than I do, he has favorite narrators. And now he's sort of just like, I wonder if this guy's done anything else, or if this is like, he's really just this good for this book. I'm like, I don't know.
But he's amazing. And so that's my thing is I didn't actually like physically read it, so part of what immersed me in it so much was the narrator. But my husband, who he finished one book that I made him finish like over a year-long period where I just nagged him all the time, but otherwise hasn't like really finished reading a book in, I'm gonna say, like 6 or 7 years. At least one that he hadn't previously read. He just struggled a lot with, he would pick up a book, he'd be interested, and then there would be a pause in the plot or something, and he would just never like get the motivation to pick it back up again. But he is physically reading them. And so currently he started on Tuesday. I think it was the day that Morning Star came out. Yeah, and he is, I think, now either almost done or done with Golden Sun. So in like a 3-day period, he has finished one book and almost finished the other. He's super into them. So I know that it's not just the narrator. I mean, it's obviously not just the narrator. The story matters too. But I'm just saying in terms of like being able to be engrossed in it, I think that was a large pull for me, but it's not the only pull. So for those of you that are watching that haven't read them, like really it clearly is that engrossing even without amazing narrator from Amazing Land.
Yeah, exactly. And that was my two closest friends here in Richmond are married to each other. We've all known each other since high school. And his name is Gil, and he had not read a book really in a very long time. He'd been kind of stuck in the world of Star Wars fan fiction, and it's because I knew he liked Star Wars. I went, you know, this series might actually be really good for people who like Star Wars. It has a lot of intensity and action, and it had enough things where I went, I bet I could convince him to read this. And I told him about not Morning Star, excuse me. I told him about Red Rising. I said, give it a shot. I think you'll like it. We were actually at a Barnes & Noble. He picked it up, he bought it. Next thing I knew, Golden Sun had just released at this point. He turned right around and bought Golden Sun because he loved it so much. And then he was like, wait, where's the third book? And I went, you have to wait a year. I know he picked up Morning Star on Tuesday, and I all I did was text him and say, we need to talk when you finish Morning Star. I'm not going to say anything else but that we need to talk. And then I just found out that a friend of mine from university, we were partners in a lot of our media arts and design projects, is reading it because I wrote on Facebook, I said, you know, I've been emotionally traumatized and obliterated by Morning Star. And he goes, no spoilers, I haven't finished Golden Sun yet. And I was like, I didn't know you were reading this trilogy. This sort of makes sense, though, because the storytelling is so good. It's the fact
it's so good.
Yeah, and honestly, it was like you were saying, you hear the blurb, like, on the back of the book, or I guess in this case, on the inside jacket. I mean, I remember reading it and just being ho-hum, not that impressed with the inside jacket. And also, I hate to say it, when I first saw this book, on the top, there's a blurb by an author called Scott Siegler, who actually did a fantastic interview with Pierce Brown. But the front says, Ender, Katniss, and now Darrow. And that almost immediately turned me off from the book because I don't particularly like Ender's Game, and I really don't particularly like The Hunger Games. And I was like, oh no. But I'm really glad I gave the book a chance because the characters, I'm sorry, Darrow and the other characters of Red Rising, this whole trilogy, blow Ender and Katniss and all of them out of the bloody damn water. Because every character, every single one is so fully actualized and they feel real. I didn't feel like I was reading characters. It was almost like getting a really weird-ass documentary through Darrow's head. And even the villains, with maybe the exception of the Jackal, who I will freely admit, I was just fist-pumping at his demise in Morning Star.
Spoiler alert, the Jackal is a villain.
Oh, well, I already gave spoilers at the beginning, to be fair.
Yeah, I just said that was a big one because you forget. And the thing is that things happen in these books in such a way where you have characters constantly shifting in and out of alliances, and characters that were maybe adversaries before you weren't a big fan of, and then suddenly oh wow, like this is actually an interesting character, and they are interacting more with the main character and on like the good side or whatever. And then the opposite thing happens sometimes, where some of the characters that you're really attached to, that are really, really close to the main character, figure out what's going on and decide that they're not okay with it and whatever, and so then they become the adversaries and all of that. But I had actually forgotten, because the Jackal is such an intensely villainous character, and particularly in Morningstar, like, you just want to eviscerate the crap out of him.
You do, though.
That I completely forgot that, especially in Golden Sun, he, like, is an ally. Yeah. And so Dave, yesterday, my husband, is talking to me about Golden Sun as he's reading it, which was so hard for me, especially now that I finished Morningstar, is he would just make these comments, and the problem is he asked me questions.
Oh,
and
no.
I do not have a poker face. Like, I don't have a poker face. So
you just turn around. Turn around.
So I was reading a different book, and he would ask me something, and I would just...
I can easily imagine this, too. Just be like, I am not here right now.
Especially some of them where I was just like, the emotional trauma that you're bringing up.
God.
He's like, God, the Jackal is just like, he's like such a sociopath, but he's such a cool character, and I'm so glad that he's on Darrow's side. And I was like,
that's literally me physically writhing right now. Because that's the thing, what I always found interesting when you read Golden Sun, even when Darrow makes an alliance, he describes it as making a deal with the devil. At the gala, after they just sort of let loose, and the Jackal kills Leto. They share that look, and he's like, I've just made a deal with the devil. And I went, so you knew never to trust the Jackal. And I remember when he went and made the deal with the Jackal, I was sitting there going, no, this is really... I mean, okay, to be fair, I was still bitter over the fact that he killed Pax, and Pax was one of my favorite characters of Red Rising.
Pax was everyone's favorite character of Red Rising.
Do you know how Pierce Brown chose to kill him? He pulled the name out of a hat. Because he knew he had to... He knew he had to kill someone in Red Rising, and he said he put all the names of his favorite characters in a hat and drew a name from a hat. And he was really upset because it happened to be one of his favorites too. But I loved Pax because Pax was walking literary irony. Pax, for those of you who don't know Latin, means peace, and he's this huge ass hulk of a man, young man, and he's like a raging machine. And I'm like, your name is Pax. I love you. You are fantastic. And the Jackal kills him, and it was horrible. And I was like so shocked when that happened in Red Rising. It like everything spiraled out of control. And you knew that scene in Red Rising was going wrong the moment Darrow was like, oh, just cut off your hand. And I went, I have a really bad feeling this is gonna not end in your favor right now. And there he goes, sawing off his own hand. What the hell? And I think you learn really just how nuts the Jackal is in Red Rising, and then you learn how truly devious he is in Golden Sun. But this is a question I want to ask you, in that there's that wonderful scene in Morningstar during Severo and Victra's wedding, where they're Mustang and Darrow talking to the Jackal through like the hologram or whatever, however they're talking to him. And Darrow says that he pities him. And I always thought that was so interesting, because I suddenly thought, and I went, you know, I have a mild iota of pity for the Jackal as a child. More in that, like, what a horrible childhood, what glimpses we get of it. It was clearly not fantastic. I mean, I can't imagine being Nero Augustus's son, knowing that your father completely hates you and would have left you to die. I think he did at one point. It's sort of referenced.
There's something,
And so I had a flashing moment of pity, and also at the end when Mustang pulls him down, holds his feet, like breaks his neck. Which I was like, that was actually really good of her. And Mustang has always been a noble character, so I kind of expected it. But I'm curious as to if you maybe had any moment of pity for him, like maybe during that scene or during anything else. Because and this is the thing, again, the villains are so complex. As much as I say the Jackal is the one I can really, truly dislike intensely, and he is, I still had that brief moment, that brief flickering moment of pity. I'm curious if you did.
The thing is that I think part of the genius of that conversation, though, and of what was going on there, and this is one thing that I love about these books in general, is everything is, like, deeper than it is in a lot of stories, and especially a lot of stories that are about similar subject matter. And I think the pity there was less, like, I pity your life, and, like, poor you had a hard time of it, because I think you learn enough throughout the books that all of them had a shitty time of it, and that, like, there's something uniquely brutal about the families in gold society, even though they're at the top and like they grow up and they can ride horses, and like this is brought up a lot in this world, is like these people grew up riding horses, which is like the ultimate like luxury when you have terraformed moons of other planets. And but I think what he pities about the jackal is more that the jackal is pitiful. As a character, his motivations are really, really, like, immature and weak compared to other characters, and so Darrow has a lot of respect for most of his adversaries. Even if he hates them and he thinks they're terrible, he understands what they stand for and what they're fighting for. And he sees honor in especially a lot of his friends that end up as his adversaries.
Roke.
Like Roke. God, my heart.
My baby Roke, my Brutus. Ah.
But also in Cassius. I mean, like, that was part of their relationship throughout the whole thing, is they are adversaries for almost the entire series. And they have this extreme respect for each other because they understand what each other stands for and that there is something they're standing for. Whereas the jackal is just kind of a power-hungry turd, essentially, where, like, he's just never, ever happy with what he's given, and he just wants more, and that is literally his only motivation. And they even, I think, in that conversation, bring that up at one point, where Darrow says, you know, you have all of this, and you had this, or no, Mustang brings that up. I think it's Mustang is the one that says, like, guess what? You had it all, but it wasn't enough for you, and look what you've done because of that. And I think that's where the pity from Darrow comes from, is he pities his character or lack thereof. Yeah. Like, he just really finds the jackal to be a pitiful human. Yeah. And I thought that was really powerful. Like, I don't feel bad for the jackal, like, pretty much at all. Like, sure, Augustus was a horrible father, but Mustang had him as a father, too. Yeah. And she is one of the most noble of humans. Indeed. And they didn't have the same experience growing up. Like, I'm not gonna throw that out there, but I'm just saying, like, just because he had a shitty father doesn't give him an excuse. I think, and I think that he understands that, and Darrow understood that too, and it's kind of this situation where everyone kind of came from some shit, and most people had a strong character, even if they disagreed with Darrow, and Darrow just sees something lesser in the jackal.
Yeah, and I think he mentioned that in Red Rising, where he says it's like the fact that he truly views the jackal as insane. And he mentions it several times, and I think he's totally right. I love that you brought up Roke and Cassius, because what you mentioned about that mutual respect between Cassius and Darrow makes me think of how, and I'm still writing a blog post on this, but analyzing the relationship between Cassius and Darrow, particularly in Golden Sun, they have that fantastic duel around page like 100, and I love that duel. It was so great, and it really reminded me of Achilles and Hector in the Iliad, and Achilles gets brought up a lot in Golden Sun. Like, he's referenced everywhere for very good reason. I mean, between that and Julius Caesar and, like, you know, Jesus and Judas, there's like so many things that happen in Golden Sun where you're just like parallels everywhere. Something which I think Pierce Brown excels at is parallels. The thing I loved about Cassius and Darrow is they're like these weird, warped mirror images of each other, in the same way that Hector and Achilles were funky mirror images of each other as well. And that in any other world, Cassius kind of would be Darrow. And for me, the tragedy of Cassius is that he really seems to want honor. Like, he is a kind of an honorable dude. But he's in a world where there is no honor. Not among the Golds. There really isn't. They preach about it all day long, but there isn't actually any. And I know Pierce Brown himself described Cassius as an eagle who has become a carrion bird, which I think that's a great image. And
that's amazing. Of course, Pierce Brown.
Of course, he said that. It's I know. Pierce Andromedus Brown, we bow to you. We sacrifice ourselves to you because you are that good. But it's a fantastic image, and especially because, you know, the sigil of House Bologna, which is Cassius' house, is that of a silver eagle on a blue field. And I went, of course, he's an eagle who has become a carrion bird. He was an eagle, the symbol like of Jupiter. He was a god, but they're not gods anymore. They play at it and they preen and pretend they are, whether they're pretending to be Greek gods, Roman gods, or even Norse gods to the Obsidians, they're not gods. They're just humans. And they're humans, yes, who have embraced eugenics and are all about, being the best at everything, but they're picking at the carcass of a society where all the work has been done by other people. So it's like carrion birds don't kill their prey, they just pick up what's been done already. And if Cassius had been able to be like Darrow and been able to reconcile the world he wants with the world that is, he would be Darrow. But he just can't seem to recognize that. And that is what I think ultimately leads to that downward slide of Cassius and is why he can't be Darrow.
And I think that was the issue with Roke as well.
Roke, baby.
Is that there is sort of, I think Cassius and Roke both speak a lot about, and Cassius especially at the very end when he's talking to the Sovereign, about the idea of the society and the honor of the society and protecting the society. And what's interesting is Cassius, I think, finally figures out that, the society is not actually what they're living in. Mm-hmm. So, this idea of society and order and what he views as the thing of honor that he's protecting, he has to figure out that that's not actually what exists. And that's not the world he lives in, even though he believes that it was. And I don't know that Roke ever figures that out, which is one of the tragedies of Roke, I think.
The interesting thing about Roke is I think Roke, more than anyone, was almost really aware of what was going on. He's kind of the poet. He kind of has his head in the clouds a lot. And it's really easy to want to dismiss everything that he says, but he's pretty good at dissecting people, at figuring out what's what. He's a poet. It's usually just not his thing. And the death of Quinn in Golden Sun, while as much as he says that that's what turned him against Darrow, I think it was sort of the final straw where he realized he needed to become the thing that he despises. Because I don't think Roke ever really liked those people who were particularly violent. And Darrow, to be fair, if you were looking from the gold perspective, Darrow is a terrorist with a huge-ass body count. At the beginning of Golden Sun, in that space battle, over 800 people are dead. I'm like, okay, he has a huge-ass body count behind him. So, from Roke's perspective, I think he just sort of gives up trying to have any sort of element of lofty idealism, which he, I think, had a little of. He never acted on it, but I think just in what he said, there was this sort of lofty idealism. And again, going to parallels, he's like Brutus in William Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, who was very much this sort of lofty idealist. He wasn't cut out for war, and he could be effective at it, which Brutus briefly was, but ultimately fell to the people who are willing to be particularly vicious and think outside the box and really bring different perspectives. And thus is the downfall of Roke and Brutus, and Roke goes out freaking quoting Brutus, and I was just like, stop. It doesn't help that Brutus is the actual historical Brutus once wrote to his wife Portia saying he would not write to her the way that Hector did to Andromache, and I was like, stop, I'm making double parallels in my head now and I can't handle it anymore. Roke was so tragic because I said he's either gonna come back, but I don't think he will. I think by this point he's been pushed so far there's no coming back for Roke. Cassius I held out hope for. I was like, Cassius is not a lofty idealist. He wants honor, but he's not that much of an idealist. He's a bit of a realist. He's swallowed the rhetoric and the lies of the Gold Society. The sad part about Roke was that he saw through all of that. He just sort of fell back on what was comfortable, which was following the Gold Society, which was the great part about Mustang is that she didn't. She played the game, and she played it really, really well. But she saw through everything, and she's like, okay, I can work to make things better. She realizes that completely dismantling society is not necessarily always going to work because you're often left with chaos, which is the hard lesson that Darrow has to learn, which, oh boy.
And I think, honestly, this is what I will sing the praises of this series forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. Is that there are so many revolution stories, and you can create the most evil society, and yes, you want there to be a revolution, but that's it. It ends with, yay, kill everybody, it's fine. And this story does so much from, I mean, early on and way through most of Golden Sun and Morning Star. There are just quotes that I pulled out because I was just like, oh my god.
Fantastic. These books are like some of the most quotable things you will ever find.
I mean, first of all, they're so quotable. Pierce Brown's writing is incredible.
Cinematic and beautiful and radiant.
My God. It's incredible, but he explores the idea of revolution in a super real way.
Yeah.
Where, first of all, it's very complex, it's very messy. It's not just like, oh, all the good people are getting together and we're gonna go kill all the evil people. Like, there are alliances forged, there are people that you don't necessarily want to be allies, that you have to pull in as allies. There are many, many battles, different things that, and like issues they run into along the way, and like all of this stuff that happens. And then they are constantly asking, but what happens after?
Yeah.
Like, if we win, what world are we building? And there's even a line that just literally says that, just like, what happens after revolution? What world are we building? Or what is the world that we're building, and what better world are we fighting for? And so that's just like this component of it that is so important and so real, and it takes Darrow a long, long time to figure out that you can't just have anarchy, that there is like this order that you need, and so it's not as easy as just, at the beginning you get the mantra of break the chains, break the chains, break the chains. We want to free people. He is really concerned, obviously, about freeing his own people and giving them better opportunities. But then, because he becomes a gold and infiltrates the gold society, and at a certain point recognizes that he is neither gold nor red, but both. He's not just an imposter, like, he really
has become like them.
A lot of it. And then it becomes more complicated because he becomes aware of the other people in the world and everything that's going on. And what I think is really interesting is that most of his allies in this fight are actually golds. Like, most of the characters are golds. And so what you get a sense of is the fact that, like, even though obviously the golds are benefiting from the societal structure, they're also in a cage that they're not okay with. And sure, some of them are really on Darrow's side just because they believe in Darrow because he's this incredible juggernaut that has the ability to inspire
kinetic energy.
Scare them enough.
He's like kinetic energy personified. The boy never stops.
Yeah, it's incredible. Like, it's exhausting almost to read, and apparently Pierce Brown has made a comment that Darrow was exhausting to write.
He has.
He's a million miles a minute 100% of the time. But it's just so interesting because it's so real. Just like everything about these books, they are futuristic space books that take place in a society where people are not just separated by color, but are like literally those colors. And it takes place at like all over the main planet is Mars, but then you
have the moon, you have the outer rim, there's Earth at one point. I mean,
all of this, it's crazy. But for some reason or somehow, they are some of the most real and like authentic human experience books that I have ever encountered. That, first of all, as you mentioned earlier, the characters are so alive and so real and so fully actualized. It's incredible. Like, with the exception of maybe like 5 people that can't be because they were mentioned like for 2 seconds and appeared on like 1 page. But for the most part, you have this cast of characters that are all so, like, they are people, and you understand them and their motivations and their depth, and nobody is a cliche and nobody is a trope, and everybody is kind of all over the place, and it's just really interesting, and like, I'm so in awe of it still. But it also, the world was that way too, where it's this huge, vast world where a lot of stuff is going on, but somehow it is described so well and brought to life so well, and you see enough of the like minutia of everyday life plus the higher level, here's how things are run, and this is what's going on in a space battle and whatever, that you really like feel like you could walk around in the world and understand it.
Yep.
Like, you could go to a cafe and know what was happening around you. And that doesn't happen in so many of these books, or in just so many books that are written nowadays, where worlds are kind of like, you don't really dig under the surface, but Pierce Brown does. Like, it's incredible.
No, I agree. And that was, I mentioned before Hunger Games, my ultimate issue was the Hunger Games was I never got a sense of what anything looked like, how it was laid out. I didn't understand how all of the politics worked because of the fact that Suzanne Collins had written a character who's not there, who's not investigating it, who's not questioning it. And I said that I always found particularly frustrating. And the part that I love about Darrow and the fact that making him kind of this undercover secret agent is that he has to learn all of it. He has to, or he's not going to survive. As he says, he is a sheep in wolves' clothing in a den of wolves. I'm like, you have to know it. And I think that's also what's great is that all of his antagonists, I sort of don't want to use the word villain with maybe the exception of the Jackal, most of them are just antagonists, is that none of them are stupid. They're all really smart, and that's even scarier. And they're all really good at that, like, quiet scary. Very few of them ever really raise their voices. Most of them just talk in normal conversation, and I find that completely terrifying. And and
there are moments where the dialogue is just like, whew.
Oh, like, man. Chills, man. Oh, man, we're down for the count. But I also think the world is so relatable because ultimately we recognize a lot of the problems that we see in our own society today and that we've seen throughout history. And it's ultimately about people who are complete bullies. That's what the Golds are. I mean, if you break them down, they're bullies. I mean, and it also explains the fact why at the end of the day, they're all really just afraid of each other, of the low colors rising. They're bullies. And that's pretty universal. And that's what I think makes these so easily identifiable at times, is that Pierce Brown has taken some very universal and easily identifiable themes and things that we see every day, no matter who you are, where you are. But then he just threw in this incredibly rich world on top of it. And what kills me is that I think he said he wrote Red Rising in the span of like 2 months.
What?
Like, over his parents' garage or something. I know. I feel underaccomplished. Besides the fact that
honestly, reading these books has made me question whether or not I should even be a writer. Like,
he's that good. It makes me weep because I know I can never write like that. Even if I were to practice my head off, I don't think I could write that way because he does have something just unique about the way that he writes. And I use the word cinematic, and it is one of the highest compliments I can pay it because I can visualize everything in my head except for the costumes. I have a hard time with that because that was rough. I'm like, because I wanted to do like a throwback to ancient Rome, but then they talk about how togas, they tried them once, it didn't work, it didn't go in style. I'm like, but then there's like this technology aspect to it, and I'm like, how do I imagine you? I eventually just started imagining the film by Tarsem that's called Immortals, which is not necessarily a great movie, but the costumes are fantastic, and for the Golds, that's all I had in mind.
Actually, what I was really interested in is that things like people and like what they're wearing, it's very rarely actually really described. Like there's not a lot of time taken on it, except for certain features of people that might stand out or something, or just like every once in a while there's a comment about like golden hair or this color eyes or whatever. But it's really not, like, the whole world is visual and the descriptions are incredible, but then when you get down to like what are the people wearing as they walk around, there's actually not a lot to that. And I was really, like, I liked that a lot. And what was cool about it is then, of course, the characters are so real that you don't need to, like, oh, this is the brown-haired, green-eyed boy. Like, whatever. And he has the wide cheeks. Like, you just know, like, when it's Roke, it's Roke. And
just by the way they speak, even. They all speak very differently. And even though the Golds speak in that, how can I best try and imitate the gory damn high speak of the Golds. They speak very particularly, but even within that, they all speak a little differently. Like, you know it's Fitchner or Severo because you're going to hear Boyo all the time. It's going to pop up, especially with Fitchner. And
you know it's Severo if he's just cussing like a sailor all the time.
And just saying shit that's so profane. It's profane and just, like, crude. So, do you know why? I think it's because the Golds speak in that highbrow speak for so much of the time when we're with them, that having a little vicious shit like Severo roll up and be like, fuck you guys, you're disgusting. You're like, oh, thank God, someone who speaks the way I want them to speak. Because this is a world where almost nobody says what they mean, and they have to, like, speak very particularly and dance around what they really want to say, and Severo just straight up says it. And you're like, thank you.
Him.
Oh, Severo's one of the...
He's just that kid on the playground that, like, doesn't give a shit. Like, he's like what I would imagine as, like, a current stoner, but slightly, like, more active about it. Just because he just is, like, whatever. Like, I'm just gonna say this shit, and I don't care anything about me, and what.
Well, because he can back it up. I mean, he's a little bit on the side of crazy, and he's a little bit on the side of crazy. He can back it up. But he is the perfect ally for Darrow, though, because he's half red. So, which makes him just so the perfect ally. Because he's like Darrow. He's got a foot in both worlds in a way. Though his is kind of also genetically, really, by that point. But what I love about the whole thing, I mean, I mentioned before parallels. I had a freaking field day as a classicist reading these books. Like, just died so many happy deaths reading these. Especially, I mean, it started off in Red Rising where they have the Sons of Ares actually talk about Ares in contrast with Mars, which one of my ultimate pet peeves is when people blend the Roman and the Greek mythologies. And I'm like, no. They can be very similar because, yes, Rome appropriated a lot of their gods, but no, they're not the same. And Ares and Mars is like the poster child for how they're very different. And then in Golden Sun, I already mentioned all this stuff coming out of the Iliad. And then in Morningstar, one of my favorite moments, though I think it might have almost spoiled me for some of Darrow's plan, was the Battle of Ilium. Because Ilium is another name for Troy. And there's the quote from Christopher Marlowe when he's talking about Helen of Troy and his Dr. Faustus. He says, "Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topless towers of Ilium?" So Ilium is another name for Troy. And I was just like, Troy, huh? I'm like, there was a wooden horse for Troy. I'm like, oh shit! And it.
Oh no! Did that spoil the twist for you a little bit?
I was sort of waiting for it. I was like, but here's the thing about Pierce Brown. He'll normally do a twist within the twist. So I'm like, I got about half the twist, but the rest of the twist I didn't see coming. And then, of course, the moment that you got on the bridge and Roke looked surprised, I just went, oh no, I know what's gonna happen. And then he started saying things. I went, what did he say? He talked to his pink. He was like, even you. And I'm like, Julius Caesar, oh God, no. I'm like, you're dead. You're dead. That's it. You're gone. You're not going to make it. I'm like, damn it, Roke. I have a soft spot for the poet characters, so I was very distressed about Roke. His betrayal in Golden Sun actually ruined me more than the breakup between Darrow and Cassius in Red Rising. Like, I was upset about that, but I knew their relationship was doomed. I mean, the moment Darrow started, you see how upset that Cassius is over the death of his brother Julian? I'm like, their relationship is doomed. I said, because that is a fracture and a lie so deep that it almost doesn't even matter that Darrow is a red. It's more that is the fracturing bit. So I kind of knew they were doomed and it wasn't going to work out. But him and Roke, it was like, I've just been stabbed in the heart, you bastard. And then they had to go and kill him, and that was tragic. Though, I have to say, the ultimate twist within a twist was that last 100 pages. The end of chapter 57 onward.
Oh my God.
Because here's the thing, even though we have already realized nobody is effing safe in this world. I mean, that was made very clear. The impact of death and really the capriciousness of death. Like, just anybody can die. And oftentimes it can be completely meaningless and senseless. I remember when Lorne, our Arcos, killed, who is it, Tactus in Golden Sun, just after Darrow has brought him back and you sort of feel good, and then Lorne's like, okay, now for justice, and kills him, and I was like, what the hell, man? I already had to deal with Pax and Red Rising, and now you're doing this? What the hell, man? But to go into Morningstar, we know nobody is safe, and there's been those great hashtags of hashtag don't kill Severo, because everybody loves Severo, and so you get comfortable. You think Severo is safe, and then
I don't know. I literally the entire time I was reading Morningstar had a pit in my stomach, and I was just waiting.
Probably because I'd just been going, I can't, cruel world. I can't.
Well, but especially when Victra and Severo get married. And
I know.
That felt like. This is like his moment of happiness before they destroy him.
No, it's like when
that whole thing with Cassius happened. I was just like, I can't even.
Okay, because see, the wedding between Victra and Severo, it's like that moment where it's like, you're a father to me, and you're like, and you're fucked. It's like, you're dead right there. It is the Han Solo in The Force Awakens moment, and you know it's just not going to end well. But what I thought was interesting was how easy it was to go back to really disliking Cassius. And like I said, I really had hope for Cassius, and they'd sort of been building that hope, And I felt like a fool for forgetting that Darrow had given him the hollow. Now we don't remember. Now we're not told what's on that hollow that we can usually guess, because Cassius is like, "How dare you kill these like children of my family?" And we're just like, "What the fuck? Darrow wasn't even there." So that should have planted the seed in our mind that, okay, something is really going on here that we don't know enough about. And Pierce Brown is brilliant at hiding stuff from the readers. He's really good at the use of time skips, which normally I don't like, because they tend to be used very poorly, and they tend to be very clunky, but he jumps time very smoothly and seamlessly, so that it's like, you end the chapter on, okay, here's what we're gonna do, and then you move on to the next chapter, and they've already talked about what they're gonna do. They're not gonna explain it to you, they're just gonna go ahead and do it. So the reader's kind of in the dark, even though the characters aren't. And that's exactly what was going on with the end of chapter 57 through the end, is you're sitting there going, what the actual fuck is happening? Pretty sure you can find that tweet where I actually just said, what the fuck is fucking happening? Because I was so upset that Severo got shot point blank in the chest, and I was like, but, and, it was really easy to slip back into the feeling that, oh, fuck you, Cassius, man, like, fuck you, man, I hate you, but, and I completely threw all my analysis of him out the window and was just immediately pissed off, and I said, that is the power of really, really good writing and storytelling, in that my brain is usually analyzing everything when I'm reading. I can't help it. It just does it. So I tend to figure out twists before they happen. Or I figured them out. That one, no, he got me. He got me so hard, and I was at my desk. I made the fool mistake of listening to this at work. I'm sitting there, and I usually have it on my iPad. That's where I usually tend to stream my stuff off Audible. It's got more space than my iPhone. And I'm slack-jawed staring at my iPad, and just tears are streaming down my face. I had to go and shut my office door, because if anybody had walked by my office, they would have thought like somebody in my family had died. Like, because I looked so...
Basically, that's what happened.
That is what it felt like. I was sitting there going, what the actual fuck? And I'm sitting there just mouthing, like, fuck, over and over at my desk. Like, I could not make any really audible reactions because I have, like, a hallway of people. And I was losing my mind. And I remember when you were listening to it, all I was doing was sending you, like, creepy smiles because I didn't want to give anything away. I was like, I can't make you feel any better because then I spoil the whole thing. And then several...
Right. I'm like messaging her, and I'm freaking the flip out, and I'm just like, fuck Cassius, fuck this, I can't even handle this, what is happening, why wouldn't you warn me, this is the worst thing that ever happened, I can't even deal with this, oh my god, I'm gonna die, what's head, and I was just like, please help me, just hold me.
I was like, no.
She's like, I told you you weren't prepared, and I was like, no.
No, you were like, hold me, help me, and I'm like, there is no help, there is no preparation, and there is nothing that can save you. And then...
that helped, because then I had no idea that it was gonna,
twist.
Gonna be okay. But that essentially it was gonna be okay.
The twist within the twist.
Twist within the twist, because I was just like, oh my god, like, what the... This is hope. I can't handle it, and you were just like not helpful.
No.
So I was like, shit, I don't think this is gonna end well.
I'm the master of keeping spoilers, because most of the time when people ask me for spoilers, I'm like, do you really want me to tell you? I will tell you. Most of the time, no, they don't actually want to know. So I just sit there with just like, I'll usually like sip coffee, hide behind a book, or in your case, just send you creepy ass smiles and not say a goddamn word. I was just like, nope. I'm not gonna say anything. Although, the great part was, is like, you're basic, for me, crying out of, like, shock and absolute, just emotional agony. Mostly shock. And then the shock stayed and got worse and got worse and worse. And then there was the second of the three twists. Because first it's shooting Severo, then it's Cassius turns on them all, but you still think Severo is dead, but at that point I was like, wait, what about Severo? I actually flipped back and was like, did I miss something? Like, maybe he's alive. No, he's definitely still shot, and I'm confused. And what is happening? And then you get the third twist of they wake him up, and what killed me is when he mentioned the hyamanthus flower. I was like, fuck, he laid the seeds of that in book fucking 1. Like, that is how they faked Darrow's death, and I'm like, oh, fuck. I see that coming?
Well, the thing is that, like, when I went back and reread the ending, like, in the physical copy after I got home yesterday, because I was like, you know what, I just gotta go. And I was reading it, and I was like, it should have triggered something that they brought Severo's body along.
Yeah.
Like,
they were like, oh, she needs the body. I'm like, why would she give a fuck about Severo?
Yeah, because then, like, when I was listening to it, it's just, like, everything is happening, and
you're
you're just so, like, oh my god, what the fuck, that just happened, that you don't even really think about it. But then when I was rereading it, I was like, that really should have triggered something for me.
Yeah.
Because I guess other than, like, as a trophy or whatever, there was no real point in bringing the body, and so that was weird, because they, like, go in, like, this little box to get to a shuttle to go somewhere else, and it's like, why do you put the dead body in there?
Maybe... Yeah.
Because Cassius did it. So it wasn't like a Darrow, like, I need Severo. But the other thing is, like, God, they're fucking acting. Because in that scene, when that went down, like, you, like, from Darrow's perspective, like, you felt it.
Oh, yeah.
And
like,
he was like...
It was
oh
agonizing. Yeah, it was completely agonizing. And then, of course, the fact that it continues on and he actually gets his hand chopped off. Like, the fact that they took it that far is what added to the believability of basically the Ocean's 11 sting. Was that we believed it because they committed 110% to it. And again, they played upon... Right, and they played upon the reader's preconceived notions of who Cassius really is. Like, we still have this tenuous relationship with Cassius, and they played with it really, really well. Well, what's interesting is you mentioned the body being taken along as a trophy, is that, honestly, that's probably the only reason I wouldn't have suspected that. Is because, again, going back to the Greeks, bodies as trophies were a thing. I mean, Achilles slashed Hector's ankles and used the tendons to drag him behind his chariot. Fantastic image, I know. So I'm like, okay, bodies as trophies are a thing. And the fact that they established again in book 1 that when they would hang the Reds for treason, you're supposed to leave them there. So clearly, bodies as trophies and as symbols are a thing. So that's probably the only reason I wouldn't have suspected it. Again, like you, at this point I was listening to it because I was at work. And so I was just so swept up in what was happening that I was having 6 heart attacks at my desk. And I remember, though, when... at 2 points, when they ripped out the jackal's tongue, which was a great moment, and then when they woke up Severo and he's like, fuck!
That was the best!
I'm like, how else is he gonna wake up?
I sent you a message about that too.
You're like, yes!
I was like, yes, bring Severo back to life, and the first thing that happens is,
fuck! Well, that's exactly, I threw my hands up so hard and so high that I twinged my lower back and was like, yes, oh, fuck! And I was like, shit! And I was like, I'm fine, it's fine, I have therapy tomorrow. But that, I mean, there's no other way for him to wake up. That was perfect. And Severo, it's sort of like, it's that moment where, again, you want to know, like, oh, I'm smart enough, I know nobody's safe, but you kind of keep Severo in this protective little bubble, and then you're like, oh, but he'll totally be safe, and then, oh god, he's not. Oh god, he's not. And then, oh, but no, of course he's safe. And you're like, I need a drink. I need Severo. Oh my god. Well, and then it just continues on, and Lysander, I thought, was a great character that they brought back from Golden Sun, the little kid, who I'm like, I really liked him when he was introduced in Golden Sun because he wasn't totally corrupted by his aunt, and or his grandmother, I'm sorry. And I thought that was great. Like, he's sort of like, I'm like, precious baby, you were like hope that maybe there are like more people who could be like this, and not only that, but then going into the ending. So I'm already like, I've gone through 6 heart attacks. I'm now just sort of crying out of shock and emotional trauma. And you wrap up with meeting little baby Pax, which had me then sobbing tears of joy, being like, this is so beautiful, and I can't take it anymore. And what I thought was great was they made a point of saying, like, what does Mustang do? Oh, she realizes she's pregnant, she hangs out, she hides out, births a baby, and goes right back to war. And I'm like, my woman right there. This is why I love Mustang, because she's just like, okay. She goes, I got shit to do. And, you know, I gotta leave him here. I have shit I gotta do. And this is part of the thing you mentioned with Revolution, is constantly saying, well, what kind of world are we trying to build? And she constantly says to Darrow, I know you can break. I want to see what you can build. She goes, it's not enough just to have a revolution. It's like, hello, it was called the French Revolution. Look what happens when you just tear shit down and don't have a plan for what to do after. It's complete chaos. And, and Mustang is constantly trying to avoid that. She's like, I understand the society is broken, but it's like needing to understand that the society is broken, but we need to actually have a plan. Plans are important. Yeah, because she's thinking 12 steps ahead. She's trying to come up with a plan. This is why she's in House Minerva. Reppin' House Minerva. I'm just saying. Reppin' my house. And I loved that at the end he says, you know, the revolution or the end of it, he goes, it's compromise. It's realizing that some things do need to stay in place, but the worst parts of it, that the discrimination and the persecution and the trampling on top of all these other colors and treating people as inferior just because of the color of their irises and all that, and the eugenics aspect of it. Saying that these are the worst parts and they have to go. We have to try people for war crimes, the people who did the most egregious of things, but then realizing that some of the structures need to stay in place because you do need structure. I said that, yeah, that's a really realistic ending to what should be happening. And speaking of the whole trying for war crimes, when Severo gave me his first of many the one of many heart attacks, really, when he decided to go hang himself, I was like,
Okay, but the crazy thing about that scene is that so that was Cassius and Severo both hanging. They were both physically hanging. I
was like,
neither of them died. But I was just like, no. Like, what is going on? No. Like, I can't handle this.
It's our French Revolution guillotine moment. That's like where we see the complete... That's the French Revolution guillotine moment. And the fact that Severo basically volunteers himself, the smartest thing he could have done. And you knew that something was up because Darrow figures it out. And he says, oh, I knew what he was doing. And that was when I heard that line, I went, whoa. I mean, I'm having 12 heart attacks, but then I just became worried they wouldn't save him in time because I sort of figured it out eventually, but I'm like, oh my God, are they going to get him off that thing in time? I mean, he's literally choking. He's choking. He's dying. Please, someone save him because I get his plan and I get the point he's trying to make, but good God, someone save him. And then the same thing with Cassius. Cassius nearly dies twice. First, he gets shot in the throat by Mustang, which was like, holy crap, I admit, as much as I was like kind of pulling for Cassius to like get his shit together and come back to the good side, I was like, oh yeah, you go girl, you get him in the throat. But then when he's hanging, I'm like, no, I'm not ready for this yet. And again, this is where even the characters who are technically antagonists, you care about them. Because we've learned that we've met them already. We met Cassius when he's being friendly, and we've seen him at his best and his worst, and it's sort of just like, if we look at the Gold as technically the worst of society, he's not the worst of the worst. He's not even close. The worst of the worst is the Jackal. It's Aja. Though, I look at her and go, it's almost stupid levels of loyalty, and I can weirdly appreciate her loyalty to the Sovereign, but I still fucking hate her. She made Quinn brain dead, and I was immediately like, nope, I don't like you. I don't like you whatsoever. And the Jackal and Aja, and kind of the Sovereign, because she's at the point where she's really gone too far. She's enjoyed power for too long, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. That is what happens to the Sovereign, and you have people like Nero, Au, Augustus, who, I'm like, he's not a nice man, but he's still not even the worst of the worst. That's the scary part. I mean, I hated Pliny more than I hated Nero, Au, Augustus. Pliny made my skin crawl, and I really loathed that motherfucker. I hated him. But it's interesting how the characters are so dynamic and so complex that even the antagonists, you don't 100% really hate them. Okay, again, except for the Jackal and probably Aja. They're kind of the only two. Because even when Sephi did things that irritated me, and she's an ally. Sephi's an ally, and I want to be like, I like you.
She's an ally that's another one of those where, like, if she wasn't an ally,
would you like her?
Because she's cold as fuck, and she's pretty vicious.
Cold as ice.
But she's awesome, but she just is like...
She's...
Ooh, like, thank God she's on our side.
Honestly, I look at Sephi and go, she's what Victra thinks of herself. Because Victra has an intense amount of self-loathing going on. And while I love the fact that Victra is pretty honest that she's a vicious shit, like, she's aware of who she is and what her tendencies are, which is why she and Severo are so freakishly perfect for each other, because they're just vicious little shits together, and I love them. Victra also has a very horrible image of herself. There's a lot of self-loathing, and I think you see this in quite a few of the golds, is this element of self-loathing. Victra has it in spades, and I look at Sephi and go, this is what Victra thinks of herself. She thinks she is this sort of, like, cold as ice, like, nobody wants to be my friend, they're just glad I'm their ally. I think that is what Victra thinks of herself. So I found that really interesting, because Victra is vicious, and she's got some very violent tendencies, but she is not Sephi. She's not even close. There is a moral compass in Victra. It's buried a bit, but it's in there. Sephi's just sort of like, she's kind of just a rage machine, and while at times it's admirable, and you're just like, damn, I am glad she's on our side. Other times you're like, damn, I am glad she's on our side. Ooh, shit.
Yes.
What was, out of any of the books, what were some of your favorite, favorite moments or favorite things? Like, did you have any fun times, like, catching little pop culture references and other stuff? And, like, my favorite was in Red Rising. There's a point where Pierce actually quotes one of my favorite film speeches, which is from The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin. It's a fantastic... If you've never seen that movie, or it's really, really good, I at least say go check out this speech. It's fantastic. And there's a line, there's many great lines from it, and there's a line, if you were to look in Red Rising, you'd find it where they talk about machine minds and machine hearts. That's quoting back to The Great Dictator by Charlie Chaplin, which I was just like, tiny throwaway, you'd never notice it. I happened to notice it when I was reading, and I was like, this can't be from The Great Dictator, and I put it up on Instagram, and Pierce Brown responded and was like, #perfect film, and I was like, it was totally intentional! I see what you did there! I'm happy to have confirmation that was intentional. But he says he drops little things in there all the time, so I'm just curious if you had any, like, little references maybe you caught that you liked, or just favorite moments, like, just moments that really stick out that you loved.
I definitely have favorite moments. I am not as good as you at picking up on references to things, partly because I think that you have a lot more background in the things that he was referencing.
Oh, probably.
Than I would, but a lot of my favorite moments were character moments with each other. I was really into a lot of the relational things, and I'm trying to think of a couple ones that stuck out. Like at the end of Golden Sun, when Victra got shot in the back and is dying and is crawling towards Darrow, and just like in her last, what you think are going to be her last moments, is telling him, I didn't know. And to me, that was like this extremely powerful moment, because Victra is such an interesting character, just so like vicious and kind of a psychopath in a lot of ways, and Darrow reflects on it a little bit too, but just even like without his reflection, I was like, shit, like literally in her last moments, she just wants him to know I was loyal, like I had nothing to do with this, and I would not hurt you. I think that's what makes the moment then in Morningstar, after they have both been tortured for a year, and Victor's trying to figure out what the fuck to do with her life, when Darrow reaches out to her and says, be my family. Like, so we can be family. And there's just like this really, like, there was just a really powerful thing between the two of them. Was one of the most interesting relationships for me in those books in terms of its build. And yes, I was shipping them, and I'm okay that they didn't end up together. But I just thought there was a lot of powerful stuff there, because there was something about Mustang and Darrow that, like, obviously they were meant to be together and are, like, perfectly fit for one another. But there weren't a lot of powerful moments where they were concerned, I don't think. Or at least not ones that, like, really stuck out to me. And I think that's because, I don't want to say it was easy, but there just was this sort of, from the beginning, inevitability to them that there didn't need to be. But some of the relationship building with the other characters had moments like that, because there wasn't an inevitability to it, and you never knew who was going to be an ally and who wasn't. Yeah. So when characters like Victra ended up as an ally, it just was really, really, really meaningful and, like, really powerful. So that was a big one.
I love those two moments. And I had this image at the end of Golden Sun when she's literally just dragging herself towards Darrow. I imagined the scene from the film 300 at the end when Stelios has been, like, played by Michael Fassbender, has, like, been shot, and he's dragging himself towards Leonidas, and they're just, like, in that last moment. Like, that was the image I was getting, and I was so choked up at that point. I was like, no, my babies, what is happening?
Yes. And terrible.
And the fact that, and when he says, like, be my family, it's that echo of that scene he had with Tactus, where he said something very similar. He goes, come home, is what he told Tactus. And I love that that's sort of what he's telling Victor. He goes, we are your home. It's like, so come be our family. Like, your family is shit. Be mine. And I was like, my babies are all grown up.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting that they had completely opposite tortures, too. Darrow's was complete isolation and really deprivation, and hers was, and, like, too much. Constant noise and sound is what they described her torture chamber was like. I'm like, oh, God, because between the two, hers was the one that, like, really put my hackles up. I hate the idea of being bombarded with noise and light, and I was like, oh, God, Victor, my poor baby.
It was, I mean, what they went through is just like, oh my God. But I also, so there were so many several moments that just, like, made me happy. Because he wasn't comic relief. But that kind of is what happened a lot with him, is you're just in these intense moments, and there's a lot of tension, especially leading up to battles and stuff. And he would always just have, like, this price comment or something that was just like, oh my God. And I have quoted most of them on Goodreads and or Twitter.
Because they're so good.
But, like, the best moment is, I don't even remember who it was, but someone was complaining about how someone was stinky, and someone else said, I told you to take a shower. And someone was essentially like, fuck no, thank you for not taking a shower. Howler rule number 17. Woman takes a shower before battle. I like my howlers, I think it was something stinky and sexy. What is it? Savage, stinky, and
Savage,
sexy.
stinky, and
whatever.
sexy.
And it was just like, oh my God, Severo, like, how are you so perfect? But also one of those, like, they're literally, like, about to go to battle, and they're talking about how someone smells bad right now. Like, this is so perfect. I can't even handle it.
One of my favorite moments with Severo is when he shows Darrow the red eyes, and Darrow's like, wow, that's great. He goes, hey, they're yours. And I was like, whoa. I'm like, and then I went, of course, Severo literally took Darrow's old eyes and put them in. Of course he did. I can easily imagine Severo with red eyes, actually. It's a better image than him with gold ones. But Severo, yeah, you're right, in that he's not the comic relief, but he sort of tends to become that, again, because he's normally talking in a very lackadaisical, laid-back manner, and he's just very crude and blunt.
Super crude. That is the perfect word for him.
He's crude as fuck, and he's blunt, and he does not care, whereas everybody else, again, is doing the gory damn high speak, and, like, it's nice to have someone who just doesn't put on the airs. And isn't pretentious about it. And that's why I think he kind of tends to become comic relief, even though he does not function as comic relief. If anything, he's a great character to have, especially with Darrow, because he's sort of what Darrow would be when Darrow goes too far. That's Severo. And I loved that moment, that whole section in Morningstar when Darrow is basically following Severo's lead, and he sort of starts to realize that this is not how we should be doing things. Like, I already learned this lesson. This is not how we do shit. And then he and Severo have their brief little fist fight, tumbling wrestle, and I'm like, I think in Goodreads, I was like, Severo, you're a vicious shit, and I love you, but you're killing me, Smalls. You're killing me, man. And that was what that scene felt like. And then he's like, got like a freaking like bomb or something he's holding onto. I never did figure out what he's holding onto, but I'm like, this is not good. This is not good. And then they tumble, and then eventually, like boys, they just get over it. And I was like, good. Kiss, make up, move on, you fuckers. And it's like, damn it. That was me during that whole scene. But it's important, I think, because we do see that Severo is Darrow when Darrow is going to go too far. And he's good for Darrow to have, because when Darrow realizes, I'm agreeing 110% with Severo, and, like, I'm totally following him, he's like, ooh, shit, maybe I should step back and, like, re-examine what I'm doing. That, but then also we see the effect that it had on Severo to try and be Darrow. Because that's kind of what Severo had to do for a year. Yeah, he became Ares, but he kind of had to try to be Darrow for, like, a solid year. And that just did not work out.
No.
Honestly, this whole trilogy, I can't sing its praises enough, which is why I literally shove it on people any chance. Even when they say, oh, I don't really read science fiction, I'm like, I really don't give a flying fuck if you say you don't read science fiction. You will like this story. Because the science fiction isn't the important part.
Prominent. Yeah, it's not. It's just kind of like the setting of
I'm like, okay, it's in space. Yes, we have future technology. We have eugenics. We have that. I'm like, but beyond that, it's not about the science fiction. It's everything else. It is these completely, fully realized, fully actualized, dynamic characters. It's storytelling that is very mature so well. Everything, as I said, I don't want a page more and I don't want a page less. There's a great line from the film Amadeus where the emperor tells him, oh, there are too many notes, just cut a few and it'll be fine. And Mozart just looks flabbergasted. He's like, well, which ones do you suggest? And he doesn't even understand that idea. He goes, it's perfect the way it is. That's this trilogy. I don't want a page more. I don't want a page less. It's actually perfect the way it is. And I used to say that I had 2 series that I would hold up in the pantheon as my 2, which was Harry Potter and His Dark Materials. And everything else just kind of fell under it. But those 2 were always at the top. I'm really glad I can say that it's now 3. And Red Rising Trilogy is happily on the 3. It sits on my ultimate favorite shelf. I bought them all in hardcover, 2 of which are signed. And I'm like, these are my precious babies. My life, I can look at my life and say it is one of those series where there's my life before it and there's my life after it. It was that meaningful and had that much of an impact when I read it.
Absolutely. I really can't recommend these books enough. They are the best books I have read in a very, very long time. Possibly the best writing I have ever come across. Just absolutely phenomenal. Also, I had to rearrange my favorite shelf to make room for them because, they really...
It's like, we need to make room for these suckers.
They're that good, and I would like to go into this pointing out that I'm an extremely critical reader. I'm an extremely critical reader. And even things that I really love, I usually have complaints about. I can't think of anything to complain about.
I can't. I wouldn't want one thing changed, one thing... it is actually perfect. There's nothing I would change about it. Because everything I could have potentially bitched about, which I never had to, he would have fixed. Because every book got better. And that's saying something, because Red Rising was so
incredible.
good.
Yeah, incredible.
Every book just succeeded upon itself. And everything about it was literally breathtaking. Because I had points where I'd be sitting there and realizing I had not breathed in quite some time. And it was sort of scary. But,
and it's amazing because they evolve. The books evolve and they gain depth and they build on each other in a way that I think a lot of trilogies just don't and lose out on that opportunity. And instead it's just 3 books that are sort of the same thing. It's very much a beginning, middle, and end in which things are expanding and deepening and growing. And it's just...
Yeah, not only just in terms of the characters and of the story, but even the world. Because if you think about it, book 1, we're pretty much just in the Institute. It's pretty small. Book 2 takes us really to the rest of Mars and to Luna. And then Morningstar just opens it up to the whole solar system. And so it's everything gets progressively bigger. Our worldview is expanding. Everything is being brought into the fold. Things that only got mentioned, we're really seeing them. And we're really understanding why people think the way they do and how everybody is so different and how this conflict could have evolved. And that is what makes this trilogy just so astounding, is just how brilliant it is. That this is all just in one guy's head. And I remember when I reviewed Golden Sun, I reviewed the arc, I called it the Empire Strikes Back of the trilogy, and I meant that as one of the highest compliments I could really pay, because I said in terms of trilogies, Star Wars, the original trilogy, is one of the few where the second movie is arguably the best one, and where it did everything right, where it needed the first film to set up everything and to really be good, and then it took everything and upped all the antes and said, alright, now I'm gonna make it even better. But thankfully, Morningstar just then took that and said, this is The Empire Strikes Back on steroids. We're just making it even better. And I get left speechless oftentimes by this film. I can sit here and just say, oh my gosh, it's so good, but I'm just sort of saying that on repeat because I don't have anything else to say about it. It's just so good that I just tell everyone to read it. And then I give my really bad little elevator pitch, and I'm just that doesn't even begin to cover it, but that's the best I can give it to you in one sentence. Please go read it. It's life-changing, quite literally just worldview-changing at times.
Absolutely. So read it.
So read it. And that is it today from us, you guys. So until next time, cheers.